The streets of Los Angeles buzzed with life, but Morgan Freeman felt a quiet heaviness in the air. The evening was chilly, and the sidewalks were slick from a light drizzle. As he walked past glowing storefronts and hurried pedestrians, something caught his eye. A boy standing under a flickering street lamp clutching a handful of roses. His clothes were tattered, his hands red from the cold, yet he stood firm, offering flowers to every passerby. But no one stopped. Some ignored him, others waved him away. One man even scoffed, muttering, "Go home, kid," before shoving past him. Morgan slowed his steps, watching as the boy tried again. A woman in a heavy coat barely glanced at him before quickening her pace. A couple locked hands and walked by without a word. The boy's face remained still, but Morgan saw the way his fingers clenched the stems tighter. He knew that kind of resilience. It was the same kind he had needed in his own past. Just as the boy lowered his head, looking like he was about to give up, Morgan stepped forward. "Hey, kid," he said gently. The boy flinched slightly, as if expecting to be shooed away again. He looked up, his eyes a mix of caution and hope. "What's your name?" Morgan asked. The boy hesitated, then spoke in a small voice. "Ethan." Morgan glanced at the roses, then at the boy's thin frame. "Why are you out here so late?" Ethan exhaled, his breath visible in the cool night air. "I need to sell these," he said simply. "For my mom." His voice was steady, but Morgan could hear the weight behind the words. The city roared around them, cars honking, neon signs buzzing. But in that moment only Ethan's quiet struggle mattered. Morgan studied Ethan's face under the dim glow of the street lamp. The boy's lips were slightly chapped, his fingers trembling from the cold, yet he stood firm, holding onto his roses like they were his last hope. Morgan reached into his pocket, pulling out his wallet. "How much for all of them?" he asked. Ethan's eyes flickered with surprise, but he hesitated. I don't want charity," he muttered, gripping the roses tighter. "I just want to sell them." Morgan was taken aback but impressed. This boy wasn't begging, he was fighting for something. Respecting his pride, Morgan nodded. "All right, tell me your best price." Ethan's fingers curled around the flowers as he did some quick counting in his head. $50, he said firmly. The price was high for the handful of roses, but Morgan didn't question it. He reached for his wallet again, then suddenly a shadow moved behind Ethan. A rough-looking man in a hoodie had been lingering nearby, eyes locked on the cash. In an instant, he lunged forward, snatching the money straight from Morgan's hand. "Hey!" Morgan's voice boomed, but the man was already bolting down the street. Ethan's face paled. "No, that was for my mom." Without thinking, he darted after the thief. Morgan's heart pounded as he saw the boy running down the darkened street, dodging pedestrians and slipping on the wet pavement. For a second, Morgan hesitated. Should he chase after them? His years of Hollywood training hadn't prepared him for real-life action. But seeing Ethan sprinting after the only hope he had, Morgan's hesitation vanished. He took off down the street, determined not to let this night end in loss. Morgan's heartbeat thundered in his chest as he ran after Ethan, who was already several steps ahead. The city was alive with motion. Cars speeding past, horns blaring, neon lights flashing. The thief weaved through the crowd, his hoodie bouncing with every step. Ethan wasn't far behind, his small frame dodging between people, but Morgan could see he was losing steam. The boy stumbled slightly, his breath ragged. "Ethan, stop! It's too dangerous," Morgan called out, but the boy didn't listen. Just as it seemed like the thief would disappear into the shadows, fate intervened. He tried to leap over a low fence near a parking lot, but his foot slipped on the wet pavement. He crashed to the ground with a grunt, skidding against the concrete. Ethan didn't hesitate. He lunged forward and grabbed at his wrist. "Give it back!" the boy shouted, struggling to pry the money from the thief's grip. But the man was stronger. He snarled, yanking his arm free and shoving Ethan backward. The boy fell hard, his palms scraping against the rough pavement. That was the moment something inside Morgan snapped. He had spent decades playing powerful men on screen, but right now, it wasn't an act. He stormed forward, his presence alone enough to make the thief freeze. "Give it back," Morgan said, his voice calm but sharp as a knife. The thief's eyes darted around, realizing he had lost the advantage. Gritting his teeth, he dropped the crumpled $50 bill to the ground and took off into the night. Morgan exhaled, bending down to pick up the money. Ethan sat on the pavement, catching his breath. Morgan helped him up, patting the dirt off his jacket. "You all right, kid?" he asked. Ethan nodded, his eyes still wet, but there was a flicker of relief in them. "Yeah, thanks." Morgan smiled. "Come on, let's get you home." Morgan and Ethan walked back in silence, the city lights flickering over their faces. Ethan clutched the $50 bill tightly, his knuckles white. His scraped palms stung, but he didn't complain. Morgan glanced at him, seeing the weight on the boy's small shoulders. "You didn't have to chase him, you know," Morgan said softly. Ethan kept his eyes forward. "I had to. My mom needs this." His voice was steady, but there was something fragile beneath it. Morgan understood. Sometimes survival didn't give you a choice. When they reached Ethan's apartment building, Morgan noticed the peeling paint, the flickering hallway light, the faint smell of dampness in the air. Ethan led him up the stairs, his footsteps light but hurried, as if he knew time wasn't on his side. Inside, the apartment was small and dim, with blankets piled on a worn-out couch where a frail woman lay. Her skin was pale, her breathing shallow. She stirred as Ethan rushed to her side. "Mom, I got the money," he whispered, pressing it into her trembling hands. She tried to sit up, but her body was too weak. Morgan felt a deep ache in his chest, watching the scene unfold. Ethan's mother turned her head slightly, her tired eyes widening as she saw Morgan standing there. "Wait, I know you," she murmured. Morgan offered a small smile and stepped closer. "I met your son tonight," he said gently. "He's a fighter." She exhaled a weak laugh, looking at Ethan with soft admiration. "He's always been." Ethan knelt beside her, holding her hand. "Mom, don't worry. I'll sell more roses. We'll get the money for your medicine." His voice wavered slightly, and Morgan could see the fear he was trying to hide. The boy had been strong for so long, but no child should have to carry a burden like this alone. That's when Morgan made his decision. He wasn't just going to walk away. Morgan stood in the small, dimly lit apartment, feeling the weight of the moment settle deep in his chest. The sight of Ethan's mother, frail and struggling to sit up, made it clear. This wasn't just a temporary hardship. This was survival. The thin blankets, the half-empty medicine bottles on the table, the quiet desperation in Ethan's eyes. It all spoke louder than words. Morgan had met countless people in his life, but something about this boy's determination struck him differently. He couldn't just walk away. He pulled out his wallet, but this time it wasn't just to hand over a few bills. Instead, he reached for his personal card and held it out to Ethan's mother. "I want to help," he said, his voice steady. She blinked at the card, hesitant. "Mr. Freeman, we can't accept charity." Her voice was barely above a whisper. Ethan looked between them, his small hands still clutched into fists. Morgan crouched down so he was at Ethan's level. "This isn't charity," he said firmly. "It's a thank you gift for teaching the world what real strength looks like." Ethan's lip quivered, his tough exterior finally cracking. His mother's eyes filled with tears as she took the card, her hands shaking. Morgan stayed a while longer, making sure they understood. He wasn't offering a temporary fix. He was ensuring Ethan's mother got the care she needed. Before he left, he did one last thing. He bought every single rose Ethan had left, tucking them carefully under his arm. "You're a great businessman, kid," he said with a smile. As he stepped out into the cool night, he glanced at the roses in his hands and took a deep breath. Tonight, he hadn't just met a boy selling flowers. He had met a warrior, and he had done what he wished someone had done for him when he was young. Conclusion: sometimes the smallest encounters lead to life-changing moments. A single act of kindness can mean the world to someone struggling in silence. If you see someone fighting their own quiet battle, don't just walk away. Be the reason their story takes a turn for the better.